Philosophy is full of talk about God, ethics, politics, existence. It's also got plenty of creepy looks. It's a collection of some of the most diverse and profound thinkers and ideas of all time. But this begs the question, where do you start? And that's a question I hope to help you answer today. And before we get started, I do want to mention there is no right or perfect place to start with philosophy. There are certainly books or philosophers I wouldn't start with, talking to you, Kant, but for the most part, there is no right or wrong way. You really just want to think of it as your personal discovery. You can take the path that you find most exciting along your journey of exploring philosophy. Now, I will say the chronological order makes a lot of sense, working from specifically Plato or even the pre-Socratics and working your way all the way up through Western philosophy seems to make a lot of sense because a lot of times they're building off ideas of the past, and also they'll, certain philosophers will reference past philosophers in their writing. So it'll just provide you with a little bit more insight and context to what they're talking about. With all of that said, here is my list of 8 books that I would recommend people start with if they're first getting into philosophy. Alright, so the first book on my list for beginners would be Plato's 5 Dialogues, or really any of Plato's works would be a great place to start. First and foremost, like I mentioned earlier, working from a chronological order, although there are the pre-Socratics before Plato, Plato is kind of like the first major philosopher, and his dialogues are like the first major philosophical works that are part of that kind of Western canon and that are built upon and referenced on and on again throughout future works. So Plato's dialogues are a great place to start. I will say they are written in an interesting way. They're called dialogues for a reason. It is often Socrates talking back and forth with a companion. They usually start with a few questions back and forth and create propositions and then continue to deduce from there. And because of that style, I think it can be easier to read because it's very conversational. It's very kind of natural, right? To think about, okay, like you're talking with a friend, you're reading this, you're talking with a friend, you're talking with Socrates, and you're going back and forth, and you can really think about the chain of logic. And it really is a great thought experiment to read these dialogues. At the same time, I'm not a huge fan of Plato. Please don't shun me. Primarily because I'm not a huge fan of the dialogue nature. But to be fair, I haven't read all of his dialogues. And I still think Plato is a great place to start because he really lays the groundwork for virtues, for happiness, for exploring death and God and all these different things. So, you can't go wrong with the ancient Greeks. You can't go wrong with Plato's dialogues as a place to start. Next up on my list is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Now, this is one of my favorite books, and to be fair, it only makes sense to follow up Plato with Aristotle because Aristotle was a student of Plato. And this book is it's chock full of so much goodness. And even though it was written, ancient Greece times, city-state, different conditions than we have in modern day, a lot of it is so applicable because he talks about friendships, he talks about virtues, about happiness. His idea of virtue as a mean to me is very powerful and very it's an interesting concept. And again, the idea that he talks about with friendships being rooted in virtue rather than pleasure and utility, I think we all can relate to that. There's so many friendships that we have that are based off of, or friendships I should say, that are based upon what can you do for me, or someone's looking at you, what can you do for them? And it's this superior inferior system. And we obviously would like to have more friends rooted in virtue and shared beliefs and values and things of that nature. He also talks about justice. He talks about just a wide variety of stuff, a little bit of family in here, and just a great work. You can't go wrong with this. Awesome for beginners. Could be a little bit more difficult to read in a sense, but I think compared to a lot of philosophical texts, a great place to start and not too difficult of a read. Third up on my list is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Now, this book is popular for 1.5 million different reasons, which I've covered on this channel before. Regardless of that, I think people gravitate towards this book for 2 main reasons. One, Stoicism and Stoic practices are very applicable. They're very applicable to modern day where we have all these external factors and pleasures and distractions in our world. And how do we defend against that? Well, we use Stoic approach. We use a Stoic approach of discipline, of self-control, of not overindulging, of moderation, of being aware of our own existence and our inevitable death. And that's what Marcus talks about a lot in this book. And also I think it's very popular because it's an easier read. Not everything he says in this is easy. There's a lot of concepts you have to kind of think about in your mind, and not everything's written as plain, but because it's a diary entry type of format where it's not chapter after chapter building upon these like systems and these ideas, but more so it's little blurbs actually that you can kind of conceptualize and think about and take the advice from them. So for that reason, I think it's a great place to start. I recommend this to a lot of friends, to my wife, and I think it's a great place to start fiddling with some of these philosophical ideas. Fourth on the list is Discourse on Method and Meditations on First Philosophy by René Descartes. Now, Descartes is such an important figure in philosophy because he is referenced so much by, philosophers that follow him, oftentimes in a critical format, but sometimes in a positive one as well. And the book isn't too long either, so it is a quicker read, but it is chock full of a lot of profound ideas, especially when it comes to his emphasis on reason, and that this idea that we are capable of possessing absolute knowledge by using our mind and using this reasoning and this rationality that we have that animals do not have. He believes in that we have this innate knowledge as well, the separation between body and mind. He creates this justification for God's existence. There's a lot in this book, and Cartesian logic and ideas are again referenced a lot later on, so it just makes sense as you're getting into philosophy to read this work, refer back to it, and make sure you understand who Descartes is and what people are talking about. Fifth on my list is probably not on too many people's lists, and that is Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Now, it's probably not on many people's lists because it is not a fun read. It is a bit dense, and I will say the back half that is focused on religion and Holy Scripture, you could probably skip and just focus on the middle, the meat of it, which is focused on politics and government, because that's where this book really shines. To me, it is an essential read for understanding politics and government and sovereign and the natural rights of citizens, because a lot of these ideas still play a part in modern day and how we view sovereign, how we view this relationship between citizens and government, the subject and the sovereign. And Hobbes basically establishes this idea that in nature, humans exist in this chaotic state of nature, to where we have the short, poor, brutish, nasty life where it's constant competition back and forth, fighting over possessions and war. And we decide, hey, we don't really want to live in that awful situation anymore. So all the citizens in a society come to an agreement that, hey, we're going to give up our natural rights. We're going to give up this absolute freedom that we have in nature. And we're going to give that up in exchange for having some security, some comfort, some stability. And the way that they obtain that stability is by establishing a sovereign, which a sovereign could be a dictator, it could be a more positive monarch, it could be an oligarchy, it could be democracy, and whatever it is, but it's a system of government that has absolute control. It's an absolute sovereign is what Hobbes establishes within this book. And by having this absolute sovereign, all the citizens give total obedience to the sovereign, follow these laws, and he basically describes how this whole system works. And it's later built upon with the Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau and also John Locke's Second Treatise. But all these ideas are so important, so important to 17th, 18th, 19th, and like I said, even modern day government systems. And it's also important to keep in mind, like all philosophical texts, history is important, and you need to understand the context in which these writers are writing these books. And so specifically, Hobbes is writing at the time of the English Civil War, where there is a lot of chaos, and they're trying to figure out, should they still have this monarchy, this royal family system, or where should they go from that? And again, a lot of these ideas through different revolutions, whether it's the Russian Revolution or French Revolution, a lot of these ideas of figuring out sovereign, citizen, balance of power, all of that originates a lot from the ideas that Hobbes establishes in this book. And for that reason, I think it's important for everybody who's getting into philosophy to read Leviathan. Number 6 on my list is a profound book, and that is John Locke's An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. I really like this book for beginners because it establishes where ideas come from, where imagination comes from, and how they originate from sensation, our senses, and how we come about memory. He even talks about consciousness, how he believes consciousness is what defines the self, what defines personal identity. He talks about so much of these kind of core principles how we come about knowledge, all these ideas. And as I mentioned, it's important to read Cartesian or Descartes specifically because he does refute some ideas like innate knowledge and things of that nature. And all of that is built upon within this book. So it's a great read. Again, Locke kind of is part of that whole British empiricism movement, which focuses on not just pure rationality, pure rationalism and the ability of reason, but more so we also need to incorporate science and experiments. And he admits that humans can't possibly know all knowledge. We can't have absolute knowledge, that we do have limits, and that we can get closer to absolute knowledge through experimentation and using our senses as best we can. So that is John Locke's An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. And I think a great bridge work would be number 7 is David Hume, who is also part of that British empiricism or that empirical movement. And his book, although it sounds like the same book, is An Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding, so a little bit different than an essay. And in this book, Hume really articulates the conflicting ideas of rationalism and skepticism. Rationalism being more like Descartes' ideas, to where we can have absolute knowledge through mind and through reasoning, versus skepticism, which believes we can't know absolute knowledge, we can't really trust our senses. It's not as simple as that. And Hume almost has this more moderate approach where he believes there are a lot of capabilities of our senses, and that's important and we should recognize them and observe them. But we also have to admit our ignorance, admit that if we see something or hear something, that doesn't mean it is absolutely true, it is absolutely happening. So there are limits to that. He also discusses these ideas of cause and effect. We can't know causality with certainty, and that a specific cause isn't always going to create a specific effect. And Hume really writes beautifully in this. It's pretty short and to the point, which I enjoy as well. He also discusses this law of necessity, similar to Spinoza, to where he negates free will and believes that a lot of life existence, how we act, is this predetermined chain of effects. Or causes, predeterminate causes. Overall, I think this work from Hume is very insightful. It's a little bit easier to read than his treatise of human nature, which is a lot thicker. This one, fairly short, to the point, and a great bridge work from Locke's. Number 8, and the last book on my list, is Candide by Voltaire. Now, this book is very different from all the other more dense works I just recommended because it is a fictional narrative tale. And so it's a little bit of an easier read. It's a short read. And it has a lot of philosophical and theological sentiments mixed within the characters and the plot and things of that nature. Essentially, to summarize the book, it mocks this idea of optimism, this idea that's especially intertwined within Christianity, that everything happens for a good reason. Everything happened because it was supposed to. This is the best possible outcomes or the best possible worlds that we live in. And basically, Voltaire kind of mocks that idea and doesn't think that that's exactly true. And it ends the story with this idea of that one should cultivate their own garden, which I really like because it kind of describes it. Hey, there's awful, cruel, brutal things that happen in this world that happen to us. We find ourselves in these awful circumstances, but at the end of the day, all we can do is cultivate our own garden, which essentially means make the best of it, take care of what we can control, and understand that we can only do so much with the world that we live in. So that's the last book. Again, a little different than the other books, not the most insightful book in the world, but I think it's a fun kind of breath of fresh air from some of those that can just be a little bit more intense on the mind. Hopefully you found my list insightful, and you can add a few of these books here to your reading list if you haven't read them already. But before we wrap up, I want to give 2 quick shout outs. First, to Jared Henderson. His YouTube channel is full of amazing philosophy content, but specifically he has a number of videos offering a lot of good recommendations, one of them specifically for beginners, so I would check that out as well. Another channel would be Chris at Leaf by Leaf. He has a great video talking about why read philosophy, but specifically in that video and in the description, he gives a long chronological ordered list of books to read, which I've leaned on a lot myself so that I can kind of work through a lot of the primary texts of that Western philosophy canon of a collection of books, basically. So check out both of their channels as well if you are looking for further recommendations. Well, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please drop me a like and subscribe for more content like this. And also, if you have some books you would add to a list for beginners, please comment down below. I'm obviously, like I said, not the end-all be-all, so I'd love to hear what books maybe I can even add to my reading list. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.